lot of things to make you sad, my dear. Ain't you glad? Ain't you glad? Ain't you glad? Glad that things don't talk. Well, if shoes could tell where they've been when you said you were visiting a friend, ain't you glad? Ain't you glad? Ain't you glad? Ain't you glad? Glad that shoes don't talk. Well, if doors could tell who's turned the knob when she's away out on her job, if cars could tell who's been inside and who you've been taking out for a ride, ain't you glad? Ain't you glad? Ain't you glad? Ain't you glad? Glad that things don't talk. In a world of trouble like me, if things could tell on me, my whole life wouldn't be through. 'Cause I'm guilty, how about you? If things ever talk that way, ain't no telling what they might say. Well, ain't you glad? Ain't you glad? Ain't you glad? Ain't you glad? Glad that things don't talk. If things couldn't tell on me, my whole life would be through. 'Cause I'm guilty, how about you? If things ever talk that way, ain't no telling what they might say. Ain't you glad? Ain't you glad? Ain't you glad? Ain't you glad? Glad that things don't talk. Now we'd like you to help us out a little bit with this one too. You've been sitting there just nicely listening since the last set, but it's time for you to do a little work now again. It's what we call call and response. We're gonna call, and you are gonna respond. And it goes like this. We're gonna do. Ain't you glad? 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 Last line together. Glad, glad.